I'm Paula Eddy Wilcox, and welcome to this episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at the leadership journey of our guest and what unique traits bring them to be the leader they are today. Who knows what we're going to discover together, so I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to today's episode of the Game of Leadership podcast. I'm absolutely honoured to have the wonderful Amy Avergun with me today. She's an instructional designer extraordinaire and someone who's been a fantastic mentor and true asset and wonderful person to know. I can't say enough about all of that over the last few years. Amy, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
Now, before we dig into having a really great chat today, which I'm really excited about, I'd just like to introduce all of you to Amy, because none of you have met her before, or you might have come across her previously, but a good reminder as to what she does. So she spent her career designing and delivering workshops on a wide variety of leadership topics, such as finding your purpose, that's really how we know each other, taking charge of your career, fostering teamwork. And Amy and I first met a few years ago when we were designing and creating the accelerated purpose experience together, in terms of what that looked like and how we delivered that. And that was a really exciting experience, certainly for me. And Amy's client list includes people like, or companies like, GSK, KPMG, BP, Devon Energy, Thermo Fisher, and Herman International, amongst many others. So I think we can safely say we're in really great, safe hands today. Amy's purpose is to help people to play to their strengths and fulfill their purpose no matter what role they are in. Welcome, Amy. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Paula, for that warm welcome. And of course, it's been such a pleasure working with you. So I think you bring out my strengths. So it really kind of fulfills my purpose in working with you. So thank you for inviting me today.
Oh, you're so welcome. And, just thinking about that, Amy, it's funny, isn't it? I always love working with people that are very different to me, because that means you're bringing such different strengths than I could ever bring, and together we complement each other.
Right.
And, it's just, I love that about these sorts of relationships. And, so thank you for that. Now, for this first episode, because we're lucky that Amy's going to be with us for the next 3 episodes, we're going to look at your leadership story. How you got to where you are today, the story that got you here. So, but before we do that, there's probably lots of people listening, Amy, that don't really understand what instructional design is. So could you just give us a quick overview as to what that means and what it does?
It basically is designing training. It's if somebody gives you a topic. So I work with a client and they'll say, we want a module on how to be more innovative. We have a team of people here. And so I work with them to find out, well, what specifically do you mean by innovation? And what outcomes are you looking for? What do you want people to, I have 4 things. What do you want people to think when the module or the workshop is over? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to know? And most importantly, what do you want them to do? And so I sort of think about, well, what are the activities that are going to really hit home for people? And I often think about one of the best instructional designers I ever worked for. We would always start off and ask people, what's hard about this skill? What makes it difficult for people to innovate, or what makes it hard for people to give feedback or deliver a performance review, or, even give recognition. And so if you start off with what's hard, then you think about, well, what can I do to make that easier for people? Because if it isn't hard, they probably don't even need any training. I mean, what's the
Yeah,
point,
yeah.
right? If they already know how to do it. So that's essentially what it is. And what I really like is thinking about what is hard for people and then feeling it, sort of empathizing with them in the situation that they're in. So if it's a leader, thinking about what is it like to be a leader who's delivering this. A very interesting group for me over the years has been frontline workers who, even blue collar, thinking about, well, what are they dealing with and how can I help them to make their role easier? So maybe that's a little bit more than what you wanted in terms of what's instructional design, but now everybody knows what I'm talking about, I hope.
And everybody now knows that every time we ask you a question, we're going to get the full Monty answer.
Oh, there you go. All right.
There's no scrimping or scraping here. We always get such a lovely view of the sort of the things that make up your thinking and how your brain works. And it's such a fascinating insight. So thank you for that. So, I can't wait to hear your full story about where you started, what's happened along the way, and how you've arrived at being the leader that you are today, Amy.
It's interesting because when we talked about what we were going to talk about, I started to think about, well, what is my leadership story? And I realized that in truth, it's not, the story of I started as an individual contributor and then I became a supervisor and then, oh, of course, now they're beeping. Are you hearing that?
I did hear a little beep.
All right.
There. You'll have to give us a little commentary on the side about what's going on outside the window.
Yes. So, what I realized is it's not a traditional story of climbing the ladder. It's really, yes, I was the director of product development for a training company. And that was not my first, but probably my, in my mind, most substantive leadership role. But the truth is that the people who worked with me were so self-sufficient, so smart. We had such a wonderful process that there really wasn't much of leadership that was required or management. And as I think about it, what really has been my leader role has been helping people to play to their strengths. Like really thinking about, I started my career as a career coach, a career counselor. And so what's the essence of that? That's really, working with people to help them identify what do they like doing, what don't they like doing. And generally what people like doing is what they're good at, their strengths, and not just regular strengths, because we all have stuff we're good at. Like, I always give the example, if I'm going on a trip with friends, I'm often the person that ends up making the hotel reservations and taking care of those details. It's a strength, but I don't like it. So it's not a motivated strength or an energizing strength. So that's really what I'm trying to lead people to identify in their lives. And I think, it takes, I was thinking about the other thing, I was thinking about the first time that I even was recognized as a leader was in the 4th grade. And I remember being very surprised when they picked me to lead one of the squads in the gym class. And I thought, well, why me? What? And it was like, oh, wait a minute, maybe somebody sees something in me that other people don't see. And I think that's sort of been part of my story, is people seeing some strengths in me. And those have given me what I would call sort of agency. Like I feel like they give me permission to do things because I guess I'm good at them. So in terms of, let's say, instructional design, I'm trying to lead people in those in the workshops to play to their strengths. As we try different skills, well, what's going to work the best for you? There is no one size fits all. People have to utilize, those skills in a way that really plays off of their strengths. And I think knowing, first of all, that I'm good, let's say at instructional design, has sort of given me permission to try some things, like to push people to do activities that maybe seem a little, not totally out there, but a little bit different than, than maybe the run of the mill. For example, I'm going to be doing a workshop in a couple of weeks on the chatter in our minds. And, which I just came across a book that is called Chatter, and it's sort of our constant companion. If you think about it, we have so much chatter going on in our brains. We're always thinking about, like even a trip to the grocery store. Well, what aisle? What do I need? What am I going to make for dinner tomorrow night? What was that stuff I bought last week? There's just constant chatter going on. And so I'm going to start that workshop by just saying, I want to have a moment of silence. And I'm going to pause and not have anything being said for 10 seconds in a workshop, and then ask people, okay, what was the chatter that was going on? So it's a little bit different way, let's say, to start a workshop by not saying anything. It's not totally off the wall, but I just feel confident enough that people will do it. And God bless Zoom, they'll be on mute, so I won't know if they're doing it anyway. Right?
Yes, it's
I can pick up the phone and call somebody in that time, and I won't know the difference. But anyway, so I think really, my leadership is more about helping people play to their strengths. And there's one other aspect of it that I just will mention. A few weeks ago, I listened to this podcast that's done by Scott Barry Kaufman. It's a positive psych podcast. He's a brilliant guy, and he brings on an interesting range of people. So he had this guy on, Arthur C. Brooks, who is a conservative columnist, and he is right now a professor, I think, of happiness at Harvard. He was a very high-powered CEO of a DC think tank. And he had a defining moment where he realized that he was worried that in the second half of his life, he just wouldn't feel useful. And he paused, he quit his job, and he began to explore what does make the second half of our lives, I think what he calls it the second curve, fulfilling and satisfying. So we don't feel like, well, I'm a has-been. But one of the things he talked about in this podcast, and later I read about it in the book, is he said we have kind of two different types of not intelligence, but two different states of intellect. And one of them is a fluid state, and the other is what he calls crystallization state. And what he means by that is earlier in our career, we're in the fluid state. And what we want to do is innovate and, be the smartest person in the room, in the company, in the world. And just, it's sort of, it's Silicon Valley, all the young, bucks that want to have the next greatest thing. And then we get to a point in our lives where what matters to us is more sharing the wisdom that we now have. And he calls that crystallization, a crystallization state. And I realized that I really like that state, sort of sharing what I've been through. You know, I like to read, and so I like to share a lot of what I've read, but also, you know, you live a certain amount and you realize, like, I often find myself saying to myself or saying to my daughter, this too will pass. You know, there's things that pop up that feel like, oh, this is terrible. How am I going to get through this? But then if you've lived long enough, you realize you've been through this 6 other times and you lived through it fine, you know, in hindsight. So, you know, maybe you just want to chill a little bit. I don't know. So anyway, I like that new phase, that, you know, wisdom phase. Of course, my phone is ringing now.
It's all good fun today. You see, the world of Amy Avergun is very complex, very busy.
My new favorite thing is the call block button on the phone, where you see somebody who you know is just calling.
I love it.
I don't know why I feel so powerful when I use that. Anyway,
hey, maybe that's a coaching session for another day.
But exactly. Use of the call block button. Right.
Oh, fantastic. Amy, there's so much in there that you've said that I wouldn't mind just having a little pick on. But the first one is a comment. You mentioned about empathy right up front there. And, you know, I bet you've seen this, but I just love that YouTube clip of Brené Brown talking about empathy versus sympathy. If you haven't seen it, it's 2.5 minutes, if that. They've put a little cartoon to it. Yeah. It is so beautifully and humorously delivered, you know, in talking about how, you know, the way we should be using empathy in our everyday life. And the fact that you're talking about your leadership story, not in terms of that linear, I've done this job, then I went to this job, then I went to this job, but more in the culmination of the things that you've done and the things that you've loved and not loved, and how that's brought together to where you are today, is a really lovely way of looking at it. And I was having a conversation with my brother actually randomly last week, and he was talking about his view of leadership and how he doesn't see it as necessarily the jobs that he's done and how he's got to where he is. And it's so interesting that I've had that similar discussion twice within a week of each other. And I really love that, because it helps open up my thinking about that too. Because if you really reflect, it isn't about the jobs that you do. It's about the experiences and the people that you come across. And, you know, like you were just referring to there, about the experience that you have. And as you get older, you realize that you have done this thing 4, 5, 6 times previously. And actually, I lived to tell the tale, and here's what I learned from it. You know, it's fascinating when you start to look at it like that. And that idea of that sort of fluid versus crystallization that you bring from the psychology podcast. And thank you, because you recommended that podcast to me about a month ago, and I'm quite a fan now. I've started digging into it too. So, you know, all these great sort of assets and bits and pieces that we can share each other for learning is so good. But yeah, absolutely fascinating what you've shared.
Good. I'm glad.
You know, it is so interesting, the people that I'm getting to meet through the podcast, and all the different stories that are coming out, and getting curious about people and why we're who we are and what makes us unique, because each one of us is truly unique, you know. And again, just dipping back into that chat with my brother, you know, when you think of leadership, you always sort of think of that sort of immediate, well, leadership means that somebody wants to follow you. And he wasn't really thinking about it like that. So in terms of that sort of management piece, if you like, where you have to people manage in your role, as you were saying up front, you don't think about it, about, coming in your sort of junior role and then getting your first promotion to your supervisor, then promotion to your team lead, then promotion to your manager, etc., etc. And, it's all those different things that make up the whole that are so fascinating. But I did sort of gently challenge my brother, because I said, as a result of you being the great leader you are, and he and I often joke about, how much we think each other's successful and how we don't always see it ourselves. And, as a result, people do want to follow him. I mean, he is a great leader, but I think still he doesn't necessarily see it like that. He just says, the people turn up to do their job, they're doing the job. I just happen to be leading this massive project, and,
Right.
I'm there, and that's how it is, sort of thing. So it is super interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
I was thinking that I think the whole thing of, well, if nobody's following you, you're not a leader. But I think it's more, how are you leading people to lead themselves?
Mm.
And it sounds like that's what your brother does. And I was lucky enough to be in a situation with, being the director of product development with an amazing group of people, that they just let them lead themselves. Let's see where this goes. So I think that's to me, that's more the theme than this series of roles that you've been in.
Mm.
And I'm sure your brother, I'm happy to hear that that's how your brother sees it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that that's what comes across for people, and that's why they do their best for him. He brings out the best in other people. That's what I think a really good leader does. And it sounds like that's what his sort of gift is, which is nice. And that's what you're good at. You really kind of home in on that, to see it. It's kind of fun, actually, that siblings see the best, because I think, like I think about my brother. I mean, I have respect for him. At the same time, we're, sibling behavior is so needling the other person, that sometimes it's hard to step back and, oh yeah, you're an adult, you're not, I guess I'm not 10 and you're not 5 anymore.
Exactly. I was just going to say, I think we both think we're still sort of 13, 14 and mucking around at home, and watching the next film of Star Wars that's come out in the trilogy or whatever it might be. My geeky side coming out there. But it is funny how we just slip back into that brother and sister behavior at any given moment. Oh, Amy, as always, absolutely fascinating to talk to you. Thank you for bringing that, your unique perspective to what leadership means for you, and how you choose to show up every day to help others be the best they can be. And I'm aligned with you on that, because that's what I do in my coaching, helping others to see what it is that's right for them moving forwards. And we both help people connect to their purpose within. And I know that you've called it the pilot light within, and all sorts of other fantastic analogies that help people understand how purpose can really help, connect you with why you should be doing what you're doing, and helping you to go out and get it. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you next week, when we are going to have a look at the game aspect of leadership. And knowing how creative you are, I can't wait to see what sort of angle you're going to be bringing to that. So I really look forward to that conversation. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. Today, we listen to the leadership journey of our guest and how they got to be where they are today. Now, in the chats, we talked about all sorts of different things, and there are lots of bits and pieces in there that are going to mean something different to each and every one of you. You'll all have your own unique takeaways, so I encourage you to do a bit of reflection now and see what this might mean for your leadership moving forwards. I'm Paula Eddy Wilcox, and I look forward to seeing you on Game of Leadership, podcast for curious leaders, next week. Bye for now.